Thank you, Mike. Thank you, conference, for having me. So this is a largely non-interactive session. We have Death by PowerPoint available here for you. But in order that you don't fall asleep too much, because it is paint after all, I'm very happy if you ask your questions all the way through. Don't save them to the end and then forget the question you wanted. If at any point you're not sure of what I've said, if you want to disagree with me, that's fine. Or if you want some clarification, just raise your hand and we'll take the question there and then. Mike's very kindly given me 45 minutes, although I think we might be down to 40. Hopefully my presentation is about 30 minutes of that, which will leave us enough time for questions. So I'm actively encouraging you to play a role here rather than do your emails or catch up on missing sleep. Enough of that. Let's press a button and see what we can make work. I think we know who I am already. Going to talk really about three things. Going to try and position the point of this talk for you a little bit. I'm going to spend some time exploring some basic questions which I think, from our perspective as a manufacturer, are essential when before you start a survey on paint. And then I'm going to share with you three different case studies. Hopefully they will breathe some life into the story, give you something to chew over and ask questions about, and then we'll hit a summary at the end. So when you see the summary slide, that's obviously the good slide because that means we're just about done. So you've heard who I am, but a little bit more about why I'm standing here. We make paint. How many here, show of hands, you're going to have to move. How many here have heard of International Paint? Okay, keep your hands up if you've heard of International Paint in the context of yachts rather than ships. Oh, that's good, that's good. And how many of you have heard of All Grip? Even better. Good, we've got I'm in safe ground here, so you'll know a reasonably large amount, I'm sure, about who we are. We spend an awful lot of time making paint and we think it's brilliant, which means that when surveyors look at it and say that it's bad, we are automatically in conflict. But of course surveyors are very wise people and they often say that the paint is good. So obviously they're the best surveyors. So yeah, we have a biased perspective and you're going to hear me talk today about paint. I'm not going to be talking about anything else. And you think, how can that possibly be interesting and why the hell it might give me 45 minutes? Well, hopefully we'll find out. One perspective that I have is that not all surveyors are created equal. And I don't mean that from a qualitative point of view. I'm sure you're all fabulous. But you do have different specializations, and not all of you specialize in paint, and not all of you specialize in yacht paint, let alone super yacht paint. So there is, and also there are different reasons for doing surveys. You may be doing it for purchase, you may be doing it for insurance, you may be doing it simply for ongoing maintenance. So there's different areas of specialization within the survey itself. So with that in mind, it may very well be that I've pitched this wrong. It may very well be that there are bits of this that you already know. Apologies for that. But hopefully there will be some little nuggets of information. And if there aren't, remember, you can ask questions. So try and get something out of it from me today. The other thing I want to say is that boats are not ships. People say, oh yeah, the marine industry is very wide. And then I'm in the business of yachts and boats, which is much, much smaller, not just physically, but it's a much more niche industry, even though we as All Grip and International have a reasonably good market share. We like to think that the owners of ships are usually found in offices in London, whereas the owners of boats are usually found on the aft deck drinking a gin and tonic. So that's really the difference. Boats are all about leisure. Boats, from a yacht point of view, are completely unnecessary. They don't do anything apart from entertain people and have fun and all the rest of it for themselves. And the point about that is that what that means, just checking my very important notes here, is that people make very emotional decisions about boats, whereas they make rational commercial decisions about ships. And how do you fit into this picture? Well, you're the guys being the independent, objective voice that is bringing some rationality back to an emotionally charged situation, potentially. Of course, you could be adding fuel to the fire, but then, as we said, that would be a different kind of surveyor. So, onwards and upwards. Some basic questions. Before a survey is undertaken, I think it's very important to, this is my opinion, so you're allowed to disagree, it's very important to try and work out what the interested parties, so not just your client, but the other people who are going to get in the way, what they are all looking for out of the survey. So rather than just stepping straight in and going, well, I know how to do a survey, and this is the kind of survey I do, which is great, it might be useful to check a few things. First thing is, why are we doing a survey? If we go back to the title of this presentation, it's a survey for a repaint. People want a repaint. Why are we bothering to survey it when we know we need a repaint? Well, it may not be that simple, and I hope with some of the case studies we'll see a few examples of that. The second question is, why is it you that's doing the survey? I mean, I'm sure you're the best person for it, but you may be specialised in a certain area. That might be particularly relevant. You may have been selected for that specialisation, which makes you even more than an independent authority. It makes you an expert authority. And that gives you good authority within the surveying process. I don't know how it is out in the world of shipping, but in the world of super yachts, there are some really big egos. Don't know if you have that in the shipping area, but in the super yacht area, very big egos. I don't know whether it comes with the price ticket or whether it comes with the fact that they're unnecessary and people are always trying to prove themselves, but that becomes an issue. So authority is quite important. Here's a little question. Sometimes people just have surveys because somebody said they should have a survey. And I know that's great business, guys, but people may have some false expectations about the survey because they really don't know why they want it. So what is the client after? And also, bear in mind that we're talking about a repaint. Are they after something that looked as good as it did when it was previously painted? Are they looking to upgrade the performance? Are they looking for an interim paint job? Now, not all paint jobs are the same, and therefore the survey may be a different survey depending on the reason for the repaint and the expectation of the client from what they get at the end of the repaint. Is that all making sense so far? You sort of were nodding less there for a moment. I don't know if you were just slipping away. And then there's some constraints that are relevant. Not everybody throws their super yacht into a refit for 6 to 9 months. Sometimes they want to get it out within 3 or 4 months, which is obviously considerably longer than any commercial shipping refit. But this is how it is with the super yachts. And therefore, the assumption that there is an endless budget because these things are really expensive, that there's loads of time, may be a false one. It may be true, but it will temper what you're recommending. It may be that you haven't got the opportunity to specify the very best alternatives because there isn't time availability. Maybe the place where the refit is being done has already been selected and their capability is low, so the location and the skills of the people who are actually going to be doing the work, and also the scope of the work. It may very well be that the whole of the vessel really could do with a repaint, but actually, because of these other constraints, only part of the vessel is going to be done. Nevertheless, you may still be surveying the whole vessel because it'll get it done, and then they can take that survey into the next refit. So there's a few things to think about. And lastly, not so much how much time for the project, but how much time do you have, both to have access to the vessel and do the inspection, but also how much time have you got before you need to submit your report? If you've got to get the report turned around in 48 hours, it's not going to be a 57-page document unless you've got a really good data logger and produce lots and lots of numbers. So the time constraints that you have as a surveyor will make a difference to the type of survey report and indeed the type of survey that you're going to do. All good so far? Yep. Nobody want to ask me a question or tell me I'm wrong? I'm doing okay. So 3 case studies. We're making good speed. How am I doing for time, Mike?
Fine.
Excellent. Good. First case study, I've gone with a super yacht conversion. This is a boat that was originally built for Mr. Evergreen. Has everybody heard of Evergreen shipping? Well, Mr. Evergreen, a number of years ago, turned 80, or at least they thought he did. They weren't really sure. And they built him a super yacht. And then which was originally green and beige, and then they turned it more into a super yacht by painting it white. And eventually, I believe Mr. Evergreen passed away, or at least he didn't need the super yacht any longer, and he sold it to a Canadian chap by the name of Dennis Washington. And Dennis Washington wanted it to look different. In fact, he wanted it to look like this. So that's the same boat. And what they've done is they've put on a new bow, they put on a new stern, they restyled the superstructure, and they fitted a replacement interior. They spent 3 years and 9 months doing it, which was a little longer than they had originally anticipated. He bought the boat for 50 million, which was a snip for something which was around about 400 feet long. but then spent 200 million refitting it. Okay, so it's a big ticket item. I like it because I've got two nice profile photographs and I can superimpose one on top of the other and you can see the change. So I'll just run that again just for kicks and grins. So it used to look like a block of flats and now it looks a little bit more elegant. There are composite pieces, all those styling pieces there are composite. The hull is steel, you've got metallic paint in there, you've got pearlescent paint on the sat domes because metallic paint is not RF transparent. There's a whole lot of stuff in there that made it quite an interesting project, but right at the beginning there was a bit of a problem and we needed a survey. The issue was that because it was built for Mr. Evergreen, they used a Japanese paint product from a company that doesn't routinely make fillers for super yachts. So it was a filler which didn't have a particularly well-established provenance, shall we say, and nobody knew how it would age. So this filler is now 10 or 15 years old, and the question is, does it all need to come off? Which is quite an expensive question. Not just the cost of taking it off, you can probably hydroblast it off without too much difficulty, but putting it all back on again is about another 5 million to add to the price ticket. So it's a lot of work and a lot of cost. So their question was, how much do we need to take off? And they knew they were going to be doing some filling and fairing because they were putting on new metalwork, not just because there was some hull plating that needed replacing, but also because they were putting on that new bow and new stern. So there was going to be new filler and there was going to be old filler, and then there was a question of, well, will this look different under a nice, shiny blue hull which shows every defect available? So that was the issue, needed to be resolved. The survey, therefore, was all about focusing on the condition of the existing coatings and trying to understand, do they stay or do they go? The difference it made was these are all the different repainting options that were available for this vessel. They could paint over the filler, they could just sand it and repaint it, they could seal over it, skim fair it if it had lost some of its fairness, they could remove it all the filler, and in fact they could go all the way back to bare substrate. So lots of different levels of work, which not only would have had an impact on the cost, but also, when they were looking at it, on the timeline, which wasn't supposed to be 3 years and 9 months. So, what did we do? Or in fact, what did the surveyors do? Well, the key question was, what is the integrity of the filler? And what is the integrity of the substrate primer? Is the whole system still hanging on? Because you can have filler, maybe 1, 2, or 3 inches thick. 5 centimeters is generally considered too much, but 2 centimeters is quite normal, although not desirable. It's desirable if you're selling the filler, but it's not desirable for the vessel. So it's something to be discouraged. Anyway, we needed to know the integrity of the filler. So what did we do? 2 things. We used Sure-D hardness testing, and the purpose of that is simply to see if it's all the same. And if you find a soft area, the question is, why is that area soft compared to the other? So we could do a comparative test all over the hull. Lots of surface area, lots of readings, lots of data gathering. But also we did something like 390 pull-off adhesion tests all over the vessel as well. And that kind of told us a lot about the filler. The pull-off adhesion testing also gave us an insight into the adhesion qualities of the primer underneath and whether that was also in good shape. What was recommended at the end was that 40% of the filler was removed. There was a custom specification based on the survey, and also there was a series of compatibility tests recommended for the remaining system as people were sanding back and checking the condition of the other coatings. Any questions on case study number 1? I can't believe I'm giving you such a complete story that you don't have any questions. Here's our second case study. Now, that's 5-year-old paint. Okay, it's patchy, it's not shiny, it's just tired. It's not really a problem. You might have a question in your head about why it's patchy, why isn't it degraded in an even way. It's reasonably fair. Fairness is a big thing for us in the super yacht world. I'm just going to wander over here and away from the microphone. I don't know if you can still hear me. But the handrail here, the reflection of the handrail gives you an insight into how fair the surface still is. There's probably, 15 millimeters, 2 centimeters of filler on here that's been sanded to make it absolutely smooth and flat. And the reflection is how we all see how smooth and flat it is. So that's looking reasonably good. So it's holding its fairness, which is great. This isn't some dodgy Japanese filler product. This is one of our fantastic fillers, so of course it's going to look good. But it's 5-year-old paint, and 5 years is increasingly being a number that super yachts are focusing on. They used to be repainted every 2 or 3 years, and whenever there was a scratch. But now they're increasingly synchronizing with the whole survey period because it makes better sense for them. But also, there was this. This is the Transom. And I don't know if you can see, I'm going to wander away from the microphone again. You can see this area here is a different color to this. What happened was they cut into the transom on both sides because they needed access to the rudders, because they needed to pull out the rudder stocks and replace them around about 3 or 4 years into the operational cycle of the vessel. And I say around about 3 or 4 years, it's actually been repainted once before, so it's probably about 8 years into the life of the vessel. And they just had to cut into the steelwork to get access, draw out the rudder posts, and then put it all back together again. They welded back the plate, primed it, faired it, undercoated it, sanded it, made it look lovely, but then it wasn't the same colour. And because of that, there was a question. It's like, what's gone wrong here? Why isn't it the same colour? Is something going on underneath that is affecting the paint? And if we just simply repaint it, is it going to do the same thing in 6 months' time, which would make the owner rather unhappy? Also, it doesn't come out particularly well on the picture, but you can see there's some sort of diagonal lines coming down from the fair lead. This should all be a perfectly even colour, and it isn't. So it has aged, and again, it's aged differentially, so people are saying, well, why is that? Why isn't it aged all the same? People expect the paint to get old, but they expect it to get old the same. So naturally, it couldn't be the crew. They never damage the paint. They don't use Scotch-Brite to get rid of marks and stains. They don't use acids and so on to get rid of lime scale and so on. No, they never do that. So obviously, it's something else. So we have to get a survey done, which is oh, I've gone too far. This is a very sensitive little thing. Let's see. So make sure I'm in the right place. Start with the photograph. There we go. So the issues, there was this question about the aging of the paint. And then there was the repair area. So I think we covered them reasonably well. And therefore the question was, is there anything really here that means we shouldn't just do a normal repaint? Because what they don't want to do is to spend a couple of million repainting the boat only for it to look bad after 6 months or a year or whatever, when they're really hoping for another 5 years of service. And the options for repaint are what we call a scratch and shoot, where somebody gets a piece of sandpaper and just sands the whole of the existing paint and applies on a new coat of top coat. We don't like that, partly because we don't sell enough paint, but partly also because all these top coats have been treated with all sorts of waxes and cleaning products and goodness knows what else. This boat does an awful lot of sea miles, so it's been to a lot of places, and you don't really know what's soaked into the surface of the paint. We like to think our polyurethanes are chemically impermeable, but they're just not. And so after 5 years, if you simply sanded the top coat and then repainted it, polyurethanes are also quite finicky. So if there were any contaminants that you simply sanded further into the surface, you could get all sorts of defects immediately, not down the line in terms of months and years, but on the day or the day after you painted it. So scratch and shoots are valid, but we don't like them. Is it sand it back, undercoat it, and then top coat it, which would be our normal repaint specification? Does it need a hard sand? Does it need sealing over because of what's gone underneath in those repair areas, and then a board sand to make sure it's smooth? Does it need localized replacement of the repairs? Do we need to dig out all the filler that was put in that repair area on the transom? And there were a few others around, some portholes and so on, where some corrosion repairs had been done. Do we need to remove all the filler? Is the filler a problem? We need to look at that. So there's some questions, and those are the options for the painting. So the mission for the survey was to determine how far. So this is a relatively non-contentious survey. It's almost like a condition survey plus. But the question was all about these prematurely aged areas and the ones that were the wrong colour. So we did a bunch of crosshatch testing. We tried to gather dry film thickness data, took gloss readings to say, okay, it looks different. How actually different is it numerically? Bring in some real numbers for us to have a look at. We also did a coatings diary review. We went back to the repair that was done and the original paint to check the product that was used, to check the batch numbers that it was used, so we could go back to the manufacturer and say, was there anything wrong with any of those batches of paint? Occasionally, the manufacturer might make some bad paint. Very rare. But it's worth asking the question to find out, because it might have been that there was a bad batch, but this vessel never found out that that was a bad batch and has suffered from it. Also to look at the application methodology and the conditions that it was painted in. Repairs are often not painted in as good a set of conditions as a full repaint. It doesn't get scaffolded in the same way, it doesn't get tented, they don't have a controlled environment, they're not controlling temperature, humidity and airflow, all sorts of things. Plus, you don't know the skills of the guys, you don't know whether they mixed it right, so lots of things there. So let's confirm the vessel operating profile, where has it been, how many sea miles has it done, and also let's just ask that question about the crew cleaning, not just the regime, but what products do they use? There's a particular product that's very popular in the Mediterranean called T-Pol. T-Pol is bad for paint. If you ever find T-Pol in the bosun's locker, tell them they're killing the paint. Just a little takeaway there for anybody taking notes. T-Pol is, the reason it's bad is it's not pH neutral. The reason it's bad, you can't use it in concentrated form. The reason it's bad is that it eats away at the surface of the paint, which is great if you want to sell more paint, because the paint dies early. It's bad if you want it to look good. It's great, though, if you want to remove dirt and stains quickly. So particularly for charter vessels, which have got a very short turnaround time between charters, T-Pol is what the crew like, because T-Pol means less elbow grease. So they love it. We hate it. We managed to make grey paint turn white with T-Pol. So the recommendation was, there was a two-step recommendation out of this one. We took samples, or the surveyor took samples from the repair areas for analysis. They wanted to check that the products were the right products. People will say that they've used the right products, but our analytical lab can tell you exactly what products they've used. So we can find out whether they're saying the truth. We can also sometimes check for the correct mixing ratio. So if somebody's mixed an epoxy filler and they've put too much curing agent in because they think it'll make it cure faster because they want to get that repair done, you'll end up with an off-ratio mix which has leftover curing agent, which is bad for the top coat. So we can look for off-mix ratio things by doing detailed analysis. The other one is the solvent level. Fillers, remember how we said thick filler bad, thin filler good? Thick filler bad is a big sink for lots of solvents to soak into the product. The degree of cure of the filler also allows for a greater or lesser absorption of solvent. When solvent leaves the filler, as it evaporates from the surface, particularly in hot countries, which is where people tend to take super yachts, what you find is that the solvent leaves with some of the gloss in its back pocket. So the more solvent that's in the system soaked into the filler, because that's where solvent lives, there's no solvent in the filler to begin with. Fillers don't have solvents in, but when you put the primers and undercoats and top coats, the solvents migrate into the filler. If the filler's not fully cured, there will be more solvent migrating into the filler. If there is less solvent, it's not so bad. Magic numbers, if there's less than 2.5% solvent in the system, that's a good number. If there's more than 10% solvent in the system, a cured sample of system, that's a bad number. Anything in between the 2.5% and 10% is, you know, a dodgy area. Anyway, so we look for solvent in the system. Of course, after 5 years and several tours in the Caribbean, there's not going to be a lot of solvent in the system, but there might be a still residual level that suggests that it was higher, particularly if there's more solvent in the repair area than there is in the older pre-existing paint coating. So we're doing comparative work there. Second thing, we need to come up with a specification once we've done all this analytical work, and the specification that was chosen was to go for an extra sealing primer over the repairs. We sell lots and lots of paints, so we have special primers for sealing over dodgy stuff. And then, of course, it was a standard undercoat, top coat for the remainder of the vessel. Our last one was a recurring paint system failure. Now, for those of you who are familiar with this, you'll know what it is. But to protect the innocent, we won't say that it's a Westport yacht. And we won't say that they had 37 of these with the same problem, which they were convinced was the paint. We were not. We thought it was something else, because it didn't happen all over the boat. It only happened in certain areas. We had a problem. We needed to get to the bottom of this. So, we're talking about, yes, a survey in relation to a repaint, because they've all got a problem, but we're also trying to get to the heart of this problem, a recurring problem. It's not just a one-off thing. So, the actual problem was blisters in the top coat. So not like corrosion blisters coming through the whole paint system, just lots of little tiny blisters in the top coat. And as I say, repeated over a series of boats. So we had been and done a site inspection where they build these boats. We had looked at their process and we had raised questions about that. And they had said, no, it can't possibly be any of that. You guys from the paint company are a bunch of idiots. You don't know what you're talking about. And we went, oh. And they said, yeah, bastards. So it was all a somewhat fractured relationship at that point. And we still didn't know what the problem was. And they were at a stage where they said, well, we're using your paint, and every time we use it, we get this problem. So we don't want to use your paint anymore. And we're going, well, that's not very good, because they're a valuable customer. What we had to find out, well, what are the options that we're worrying about? Well, it could be that we sent them some bad paint, selectively, for 37 boats, for just part of the boat. But if we're doing our job properly, we need to eliminate these things. Process of elimination, we need to knock out, we need to look at all the batches and prove that they've been used successfully elsewhere. We need to redo all our own factory QCs. We keep retained samples to enable us to do that. So we looked to see if there was faulty batches. Also, we looked at the product to see if perhaps the product itself just doesn't fit with what they're doing and is maybe the wrong product. Or maybe it has an Achilles heel that in certain conditions it just falls over. We also looked at whether it was the incorrect specification, whether we should have recommended a different paint or a different undercoat or whatever. We also looked at their process. Yes, we thought their process was flawed, but we really had to prove why. And the clue is that originally our specification had said that you must apply the top coat within 36 hours of sanding the undercoat. And then our local guy said, when they asked him if we could change it, oh yeah, you can leave it for a month. And they went, that's great. So we'll sand all these composite parts in undercoat. We'll assemble them all, and then we'll paint them all later. And that was better for them for their production scheduling. So they were still following all the same steps they had done before, but there was an issue of a time change. And also we were looking at the production environment. We were looking for sources of contamination. We were looking at the painting environment. Because there was this curious little thing. One captain on one of the boats said, the funny thing about these blisters is they're there in the morning, and then they're gone in the afternoon. And then they come back the next day. So we thought to ourselves, there must be something in there that's, hydroscopic, soaking the water in, because you get dew overnight, and then it's getting boiled off in Florida and so on. So we're all nodding sagely in the crowd, yes, but we've got to prove it. We've got to prove it because they believe we're just selling dodgy paint. So we consulted with a composite surveyor in particular, because these are fiberglass boats, to do a bunch of things and look at it. And ultimately, it was all about finding the root cause of these blisters. We knew how to repaint the boats. You sand off the top coat, you apply some more top coat, some undercoat, top coat preferably, and away you go. That wasn't the problem, but it was the root cause of the blisters. And so obviously we needed to inspect the vessel and the coatings, but most importantly, we wanted to get a sample from the defective area, because this is the blister. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but that scale is 200 microns. So it's quite a small blister. Why on earth have they bothered? Remember, it's a boat. They don't need it. They're very emotional. But there was quite a lot of blisters. It was like a rash of them in the areas that were affected. So we managed to get a sample by paying the captain $1,000 to cut out an entire piece of laminate and then get it repaired. Because the yard wouldn't let us do it, because I think they realised what we would find out, that it wasn't the paint. So it cost us some money to get this done. We had an independent guy come in and do it, and we analysed the blister contents. And we found, anybody, what do we find?
Water.
No, the water had evaporated by the time we got to it. What was the thing that was sucking in the water? Sorry? We thought it might be that, but it wasn't that. We thought it might be that, but again, it wasn't that. No, not a fibre. I mean, these are all things that we thought it might be. In the end, it was salt. Salt. Because it was on handrails. Our local guy, when we were going with the surveyor to inspect it, he said, when the people, because the boat was getting some work done, he said, when the workers are climbing all over the boat, where they are touching it to climb around the boat is where the blisters are. So remember, they were working on the boat for a month after sanding it. They were putting protection over that to stop dirt and whatever, and all they did to clean the surface is to Scotch-Brite it with solvent. That's why there wasn't any grease, because the solvent took the grease away. Because if it was off your forehead, it would be grease and salt. But the salt is not solvent soluble, so it remained. They also, as you can see, they Scotch-Brited away some of the nice sand scratch that was in there. You know, if you take 320 grit and sand it, you'll get something like 10 to 17 microns of sand scratch depth. They had about 3 microns. Wasn't very much. So again, the adhesion of the top coat wasn't very good, so it was easy for the salt to push the top coat away from the undercoat. So we found out what it was, and we recommended they change their production process, but they still changed their paint company. Bastards. But very valuable learning for us, because when we see this again, we will know exactly where to go and what to look for. So that's our 3 case studies. That means we're pretty much at the last slide. So here are the learnings that I would really like you to take away from this. One is that paint surveys are really good at taking away uncertainty. We mentioned all those egos and these people being very emotional. Data, data, data. I love data. Do we all love data? Numbers, all that kind of stuff? You should be more enthusiastic than that. With data, we can prove or disprove theories, and then we can move away from just guessing to becoming really clear about what a thing is and what we need to do about it. Lots and lots of things to be considered, as we've seen. You guys are in a really good position to sift through all the irrelevant stuff. That's the polite version of it, because you have independence and objectivity. You may be a hired gun, but nevertheless you are still a third party. You aren't embroiled in this whole thing. You can bring a calming and intelligent input into some of these situations. But you may not have the answer. It may not be that easy. There may be lots more work to be done, and you may not have the resources to do that. But you should be in a position to say, if you don't have the answer, this is what the next step should be. And finally, we can help you. We have big analytical labs full of people, and whilst we're investigating our paint, we don't charge for it. So that's that. Thank you.